all research starts with a problem you're trying to solve. In our faculty context, Stellenbosch University, we started with the observation that our engineering students don't prepare for classes, that there are industry complaints, that graduates don't know how to do things, students don't remember what they were taught, and this raised a whole lot of questions. Now, as you gather these observations and these questions, a few features of the problem that you're investigating begin to emerge. Now, all our problems have multiple aspects, and we're almost always tempted to try to deal with all of them. Most problems are initially too big for postgrad research, and certainly for a research paper. One simply has to prioritize, zoom in, not ignore the other aspects, but zoom in. But what do we zoom into, and how do you do this? Let's go back to our faculty problem case. So here we have multiple aspects. Who's doing the teaching? What's the context? What is the subject area? How are students learning? What are the conditions? Now, none of these stand in isolation. They always relate to each other and to your central problem. But all those related areas define what we call the territory in which we're working. In this case, in our faculty problem case, the territory is engineering higher education. In fact, if you Googled the term engineering higher education, you'd come up with a number of publications or a number of sites or platforms that deal specifically with all features in engineering higher education. So, that's the territory in which you're working. We obviously cannot solve all the problems implied in this territory map. But we've already said that we think the problem we're interested in is located in relation to student learning practices, the way we're assessing, and that this is impacting on the profession itself, in what industry expects. So there we already know we have three core terms. So that focus, that zooming in, gives us the niche. This is the space in which our research is going to make a difference. Assessment that enables deeper or more effective learning can produce effective engineering graduates. There is now the niche within the broader territory. Now, you don't make a difference to a territory. That is simply where your research is located. But the niche is the spot that you carve out for yourself where you can make a difference or some kind of contribution. So take a moment now to do exactly this exercise, putting down all those terms in relation to where your project is located. Define clearly for yourself what's the territory, and then zoom into the niche, the area in which you're going to make a difference. And that should give you 3 or 4 key terms. Now, to get to the point of determining your niche is not so straightforward. It takes a thorough and iterative literature review. Now, if you take your 3 key areas, those 3 key terms that constitute your problem, and break them down into subtopics, you need to combine all these permutations while you're searching for relevant literature. The perfect place to start is obviously with Google Scholar. Now, here is an example. Engineering, assessment, higher education. And what you can see is that usually the first 10 entries under any of your search permutations will give you a good idea of whether or not you're using the right terms, you're looking for the right things. So you need to play with this as you feed those different permutations into Google Scholar. See what comes up. If you have to page beyond the first 20 entries and you're getting this feeling that these are not quite accurate, then it's your wording that needs to change. And you can experiment with that as you go along. Once you hit on the kinds of words that you need to be using and you start refining your search and you start finding articles that are relevant within the first 10 that pop up underneath the Google Scholar search bar, you can then decide whether or not those first 10, if they look good enough, you can then create an alert. So here you see on the left hand side, you simply click on that and you enter the email address you'd like to use, and this will send a weekly or daily digest of relevant newly published papers, or even older papers if it's the first time you're searching for them, straight to your inbox, and you can start filing those. The good thing about Google Scholar is that most of those are actually linked to downloadable papers that you can access immediately. Now, it's a really good idea to keep track of the search terms you're using. You can see that in our faculty project there were multiple terms that we used, but this really enabled us to constantly maintain a bird's eye view of the project as a whole. And in fact, we have a number of publications in this very space simply because we managed the literature review process and the tracking process really well. Another addition to your system is that as you start finding literature that is relevant to your problem and you start refining your search, you might really wish to try a spreadsheet system. We simply used Google Sheets. In fact, we used Excel and then uploaded as a shared Google Sheet, where you keep track of what is the search term, what is the territory, what is the niche, what's the paper, what's the date, what does the abstract say. And what this allows you to do is that once you start writing and referencing and referring or citing papers and referring to the literature that is out there, you can do a sift and filter in these systems that really starts making your writing a little easier. Now, from the zooming in to your problem, those identifying of 3 key kind of areas and permutations, and that extensive literature review process, you will find that you will have a refined research question. Now, this is in what we call inductive research, where you start with a problem and you don't already have a method or a standard approach through which to approach it. So in our faculty case study, which I've been using it as example, from all of that zooming in, we now have, okay, what forms of assessment and related conditions enable deep learning that leads to empowered and effective engineering student performance? As a matter of interest, nobody seems to have tackled this. So we know as a faculty that we can make a real contribution here. It's what we call occupying the niche. Now, this whole process that I've just been describing in your field is generally governed by the scientific method. And that's also described as a deductive approach, where you will start off with a very specific question, an hypothesis, for example, and you will test that hypothesis with a number of experiments, whether it's artifact-based hardware, software, modeling, very often in your case is the kind of thing you do. And that's a different kind of process. That's called a deductive process, where, as I said, you start with an hypothesis. Now, we also run this in the more qualitative studies, where we also start with an hypothesis. And we could have taken that same question that I asked previously that we came to through that inductive process. We could take a deductive approach and go, okay, alternative forms of assessment and related conditions will enable deep learning that leads to empowered and effective engineering student performance. And what we would then do is trial several alternative forms of assessment in different student groups, run surveys, interviews, or gather data in a whole lot of different ways, look at performance metrics. That way we will also have kind of a more scientific method-orientated deductive approach. But either way, we're trying to solve the same problem. Obviously, you can't do all of this in a day. It takes serious time, but a good starting point is to capture all these processes somewhere. You can consult the resource folder that has been made available to you, download the research map templates, or even set up your own. Having a physical research map with your key terms, territory and niche and question and methods somewhere visible can in fact help to motivate you. If you have a dedicated working area at home or in a shared office space, put up that map. You're going to live with this research problem for a significant period of time. Seeing that map and adding to it as you make progress can really enrich your process. And you'd be surprised at how many things you think about in those times when you don't think you're actively working on your research problem. So just as a final reminder, as you conduct your literature review and work on your particular problem, remember that the purpose of postgrad work and publishing is to make a contribution or to demonstrate that you are capable of doing so. Your research map is the basis of everything you're going to write on this research project, whether it's your thesis or an abstract or final publication. And in all of those pieces of writing, the pattern is the same. Establish the territory, tell us why it's important to work in this space, what else has been done in this space. Then move into the niche. Establish a niche. Are you going to make a counterclaim? Say, everyone else has done this, however. Are you going to indicate a gap? Everyone else has done this, but nobody has looked at that. Are you going to raise a question? Now that we know all of these things about this particular problem or project, what about? Are you going to continue a tradition? In other words, build a better model based on something that someone else has already done. That is establishing the niche. And then the piece of writing that you deliver needs to occupy that niche. You're going to identify the problem that you are focusing on where you're going to make a contribution because you're doing something different. You're going to tell us how you're going to do this. You're going to then present it, what the key findings are, and tell us what to expect. That's your abstract in a nutshell, which you will then flesh out, whether in a paper or whether in the final thesis. Good luck.